Hello everybody, I'm back with another video for you today, and I figured it was time to get kind of a comprehensive and pretty detailed new player guide on the channel because I don't have one, and the game did just release on Steam. I've been getting a lot of questions from people about the new player kind of grind and how to make that work. So I'm just going to try to get everything into this video that I can, all the tips, all the tricks, all the information about reward points and the store and things like that, to help you along your way starting out in Gwent. Now I'm not going to go over the absolute basics of the game, the rounds and how cards work and that you play a card every turn, etc. I think the tutorial should cover that, but I will jump into training to discuss some sort of a little bit more intermediate ideas about, round 1, 2, and 3, and card advantage and things like that. So let's just jump straight into that, and then I'll go over deck building, reward points, and all the other extra stuff. So yeah, let's do it. So in Gwent, you're going to come into this screen, you're going to Mulligan. Now the Mulligan is important in Gwent. It's your chance to get gold cards, from your deck, swap your bronze cards. Your bronze cards are your weaker cards, your gold cards are your good cards. Same kind of story as in Witcher 3 Gwent if you ever played that. But the difference is there's kind of a wide range of values that these cards can have dependent on their provision costs. So provisions basically show you how expensive a card is to put in your deck. Kind of similar to a mana cost, although not quite. More often than not, it's just better to play a higher provision card than a lower provision card in terms of getting points. As in, a higher provision card will be stronger than a lower provision card. Now, importantly, it can be very important to save and hold on to your higher provision cards for later in a Gwent game. Playing them early on isn't necessarily the best idea, because then you're going to lack those powerful cards later on in the game. So with the Mulligans, we usually just want to get rid of our weaker cards, try to make the hand as good as we can, get as many gold, powerful cards into the hand as possible, and then we'll begin playing. Yes. So, when you start the game, one player will be on the first play, the other will be on the second. The reason the first player gets some kind of bonus stratagem, as they're called, is because you have a bit of a disadvantage going first. The player who plays second can always react to what the opponent does. They can put them on the back foot, you can play a lot of points and force the opponent to react accordingly to that, or you can sit back and relax and play weak cards, and the opponent is always worrying about overcommitting and using some of their really powerful stuff and not gaining too much from it, because they're always only able to win the round with one card less than you. So this concept of card advantage is pretty key in Gwent, and is going to really decide a lot of your early games. You want to make sure that you don't miss out on card advantage. In round 3, or in the important rounds, you usually want to be on the same amount of cards as your opponent, and that includes, your leaders. Now here, his leader actually shuts mine down, so we both are not going to have leaders for this game. But, typically you want to try to save your leader for as late in the game as possible, because that can act as an extra card in your hand that you can use to win the game. Now there are some exceptions. There are leaders that are able to shoot or do an ability multiple times in a round throughout the game. They have a cooldown ability. I can go through the leaders in the deck builder a little bit after this game to explain those, but really, if your leader doesn't have a cooldown, if it isn't reusable, then you want to try to save your leader for later on. Very important. So let's just play a card here. We can maybe move this unit of his. It's melee, which means it only shoots if it's on the melee row, so if I move it to ranged row, it won't do anything. And you'll see that a lot of cards have different effects whether they go on melee or ranged. Now I'm not going to go into detail on all of the different abilities. You just need to kind of read the cards for yourself, and there's kind of all sorts of explanations of the different keywords that they have, so as long as you read everything on the card, you should be good on that front. So I'm not going to get into too much the specifics of each card. Really here we just need to understand the flow of play here. So because I'm going second, I kind of have two options. I can either play aggressively or defensively. If I play defensively, I'm kind of playing my bronze cards, my weaker cards, and waiting for him to commit something to, decide what to do. Or I can go very aggressive. So I'll go aggressive here and show you what that looks like. So I'm going to play a very good card here, a very high provision, 12 provisions, that's a lot. And I'm just going to smash that down onto the board. It's going to get me ahead in points. which means if he ever takes a pass to end the round for him, get out of the round, I can also take a pass, and I'll end up winning that round with the same amount of cards as him. And we'll talk about why that's very important. But really here, this aggressive play is going to put him in a situation where he either has to choose to lose the round in a bad spot, or he can choose to fight it and also play good cards himself. It looks like he's not playing anything particularly good. I'll just play a kind of weak card myself as well. Deal some damage. And yeah, the objective here, going second, is either to play weak cards out or to try to pressure the opponent, have more points than them at every turn, and force them to play good stuff in order to react to that. So we'll continue being aggressive here. I'm just going to play a bit more of my big power cards. I'll play the Elias here, which is a good powerful play. Going to spawn a lot of elves. Aileron's going to come out. This is another card that summons from your deck when you have 5 elves on the board, which we do. And as you see here, I'm going to win the round. Now we both have 6 cards. Typically, this won't happen. You don't want this situation to happen if you are the Nilfgaard player here. This is very bad for Nilfgaard, because I have complete control of the game. I can probably get a card more than him in this game just through passing in round 2 when I have more points, and he needs to react. And yeah, it's just really not a good situation. So you want to avoid losing on even, that's what we call that, losing on even cards. And if you can, you want to try to win on even cards, because that will put you in a really good spot. So again, we can mulligan some of our weaker cards here, try to look for our better ones, and now I have freedom to kind of push the opponent if I want in the round 2, or I can pass to round 3. Now in this kind of a situation, I definitely want to push, because we're both going to draw 3 cards into round 3, so I would quite rather like to go to 6, 5 cards, something like that, so that I can maybe gain 1 more card than the opponent by getting ahead of him in points. We'll see if that actually happens, but that is probably the objective here. Otherwise, the objective is just to potentially push the opponent, get a lot of their good stuff from them, again, playing bad cards for their good cards, potentially. So whatever, we'll just play some stuff out, doesn't matter too much here. And yeah. So really we've got the concepts there nailed. The winning on even, losing on even, that's key. Normally the blue coin, the player who's going first, we call that blue coin, and we call the second player red coin, just because the coins used to be that way. So if you get confused with that kind of terminology, then that's why. But yeah, the player going first will often, or either player will actually often be winning round 1 card down. So winning on even, losing on even, that's kind of an exception, and you want to try to avoid those situations, or try to get those situations depending on whether you're going first or second. So normally one player in round 2 will have 1 less card than the opponent, and that makes their push in round 2 a little bit riskier, because if the person with an extra card ever gets ahead of them in points, then that's going to be bad news for the player pushing, because they're going to have 1 extra card for round 3. That is the person who has that extra card in round 2. Obviously, if he was ahead in points here, he wouldn't lose a card, right? So imagine if he was on 6 cards and ahead in points, and I passed, then he could also pass, and he would have an extra card over me. Here, it's a very different situation. I can pass now, I have more points, and the same amount of cards, so he has to play another one, and here I end up being 1 card ahead of my opponent for the round 3. So this is a very good situation for me. Usually, because Gwent, each player is kind of, constricted to only playing 1 card per turn, if you have a whole extra card over your opponent, that's a lot of extra points usually, and it also gives you an advantage in terms of sequencing your cards and playing, reactionary things to them where they can't react because they have to pass at the end of the game, and you still have a play or 2 remaining. So keep that in mind. So yeah, we'll not worry too much. Now the round 3 is just about getting the most points you can possibly get, and whoever has more will come out on top. So I guess we can play it out. Not too much of the problem. Now the AI is pretty easy, so I'm not gonna worry too much about getting as many points as I could. But yeah. So really, yeah, Gwent comes down to managing these 3 rounds, not playing too many resources in the earlier ones because you need to keep some things available for the round 3, but you can use resources earlier in the game to maybe pressure your opponent, gain a card or 2 from them, and yeah, to make their life difficult. And yeah, the concepts there are quite simple. So I think we've had enough of this game. Let's just jump into the deck builder and have a look at deck building. So, how do you build a deck? What do you do with deck building? Well, first things first, you probably want to just play quite a few games with the starter decks that you'll have if you're very new, and kind of get a feel for the different factions, what each of them do, and whether you like any of them more than the others. That'll be a good kind of place to start. You definitely want to kind of focus on 1 or 2 factions starting out, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But for deck building, I'm not going to go into, super big detail on how to do that, but really some of the key things you need to keep in mind are you have a provision cost of your leader. So here, Deadeye Ambush is 15 provisions. This adds 15 provisions to your deck's provision limit. So each deck will have a limit that is normally 150, and then you're going to get some extra provisions based on how many provisions your leader has. So here we have 165 provisions to work with, and you can see each card has a different provision cost. Now, very important, you want to always make sure, your deck here is making use of all of the provisions that you have. You want this number to be 0 right here when your deck is finished. Otherwise, your deck is just lacking power. It's going to be at a disadvantage to players who have more provisions used up in their deck. So don't make that mistake. Make sure your deck can kind of fill up its provisions if you can do that. Now that might require you to have a bit of a built-up collection, or have some of the more powerful cards, but once you start building up a collection, getting some kegs, using reward points, etc., then that shouldn't be too much of a problem. So keep that in mind. And the other concept for deck building is the actual cost and value that cards can gain, and that's kind of determined by their point per provision cost. So that means you look at a card and how many provisions it has. This guy, for example, is 4, and then you can work out how many points it will usually get. Since he gains Vitality for 2, Vitality boosts by effectively 1 for each you have, so this is effectively boosting by 2. He ends up being a 6-point card. So this guy can be 6 points for 4 provisions. And that's going to be quite a good amount of points for these 4 provision cards. You usually want to get about 6 points from them if you can. Now that might change in the future, depends when you're watching this. The power creep in the game might be a thing, so keep that in mind. But generally 6 points for 4, maybe 7 points for 4 is quite good. 5 points for 4, not so good. Now generally, cards will be worth kind of a little bit more in terms of points than their provisions. This is especially true at the lower provision end. So, a half-elf hunter is 6 points for 6, but he also has an ability, the Harmony, which can get him quite a few points. So he's usually going to be worth more than a 6 for 6. The same with the Marauder, the same with all these different cards at the bottom. Now, as you start to go up higher, the cards will be less likely to gain the points that their provision cost is. So, for example, Venosiel is 11 points if you spawn 2 Elven Deadeyes, so he's only 11 points for 12. Now, of course, you can make him better by having him synergize with other things, but generally, the more expensive a card is in provisions, the less points in comparison to that provision cost you're going to gain from them. And that's just so that the cards are kind of balanced. If all of your bronzes were just 4 points, then, and your 12 provision card was 12, then there'd be a bigger difference when you don't draw your golds and only draw bronzes. So there's kind of a bit of a balance between the 2 extremes there. So try to keep that in mind when building a deck. Good cards generally are going to have a similar amount of points to their provision cost, or even more points than their provision cost, especially in the lower provision kind of thresholds. But otherwise, for deck building, I'd recommend just having a look at all the different cards, finding some concepts that you think could be quite interesting, maybe with some cards that you have, and explore a lot of different stuff. You'll find some things don't work super well and other things will. And that's kind of the joy of Gwent early on, is deck building and finding out, at least for me, finding out some of the cool combos that you can do. Now you can, of course, look at streams and YouTube videos if you want kind of a head start and a way to build those really meta powerful decks, but I wouldn't stress about that too much. You should be able to climb in the ranks up to about rank 15, with your own home-built decks, improving them as you go, so don't really worry too much about that when you're starting out. Also, I should say, don't worry too much about jumping straight into the ranked game mode, the classic. That's probably the best thing to start with. Arena, if you go to that, you're probably going to be matched up against very experienced players. You can also play seasonal game mode, which is quite fun, but yeah, I would recommend just sticking to Classic for the most part when you're starting, as you'll get matched against similar level opponents and similar rank, so that should be a lot easier and make it a more enjoyable climbing experience for you. So I wanted to briefly mention the different types of leaders, just because I kind of failed to explain that properly. But certain leaders will have a cooldown ability. Rural Inspiration is an example. These leaders right now are not very good, but they might be good in the future, so I don't want to say they're never good. But these guys, you can get value from them throughout the game. You have other leaders which are kind of split. They don't have a cooldown, but they can split their ability. And you've got stuff there like Guerrilla Tactics, you've got charges effectively. So you can use this ability multiple times, so you can split up the value. Same with the Deadeye Ambush that I was playing there earlier, you can split up the charges. And you also have leaders which are just one turn kind of use. Now the actual little boxes here, I guess, around the abilities can show you what kind of ability they are. So Call of Harmony is a one turn use ability. You just get a big chunky amount of power from it. You usually want to save that for round 3, etc. And you can see here Mystic Echo is the same, it also has this square box. So keep in mind that similar abilities will have similar shapes around them. That can be a little cool tip for you, starting players. It says here card manipulation ability, utility, and etc. That's a bit bugged apparently, but defensive ability. But yeah, generally similar abilities will have these similar shapes around them. Anyway, I think that's really all there is to the deck building. Let's just talk about now the reward points and kind of filling out your collection, where it is best to spend your rewards and your scraps and everything like that. So to actually gain reward points, you're going to want to complete quests, which occur daily. You can re-roll 2 of these if you're not feeling like doing this stuff. You want to be trying to complete these to get the ore and the reward points. You also want to be trying to complete sort of these contracts, which you can find in your, not in your friends list, but in your profile over here. And you can kind of track those of which you kind of haven't done, and these will give you different rewards, some reward points, some cosmetic rewards, etc. So try to complete some contracts, some quests. That's going to give you the means to actually build up your collection a bit. So yeah, this is the profile, I should mention. It's got kind of all the info on how many games you've played, all of your wins, your collection status, etc. So yeah. So let's jump into how do we spend reward points and all that good knowledge. So typically you can come up here to get the reward tree, click on that reward point kind of up there. Now there's a lot of different stuff you can spend the reward points on. You're not going to have as many reward points as I have. I have a lot of rewards because I was playing in the beta when it was very easy to farm kind of scraps from milling cards that got nerfed. So you're not probably going to have as much as I do. Don't worry about that. If you go on any kind of tree, what you're going to be wanting to maximize here, if you're interested in building up the collection, is these story nodes, because these guys give you a lot of ore if you're able to kind of collect all of them. Don't focus too much on meteorite powder and the other cosmetic rewards that you can get. Maybe if you don't care about those. If you do care and you're not worried about building the collection up fast, then by all means go for that. But yeah, you'll see there are a lot of story nodes. If you're able to complete all of those, you're going to get a lot of ore, and that will give you access to a lot of different cards, a lot of kegs, which you can buy with that ore. So those are kind of very important. Otherwise, you just want to maximize your kind of efficiency by getting a lot of these ore nodes rather than the scrap nodes. They're not quite as good value as the ore. So that's generally what you should try to do, with your reward points. Also, getting kegs can be very, very good. So maximize your rewards by, taking the path that gives you maybe the most story nodes, the most kegs, the most ore nodes. So something like, for example, with this tree, you could go here, 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 etc. Pick up all those story nodes and you're going to get a lot of resources to spend and a lot of new cards as a result. So generally that's my advice. Now you can get a lot of cosmetic rewards here as well if you're interested in that. But if you're interested in building the collection, as I say, then focus on those story trees. Also be careful of using the sort of seasonal trees here, as these will disappear at the end of the month as far as I'm aware. They might change that at some point, but I've had a few players come to me a little bit upset and confused that they can no longer access this tree once the month ends. So be careful if you invest all your points into these seasonal trees. You know, there's some cool cosmetics and things to be gained here, but it does require playing seasonal game mode, and as I said, be careful, because if you don't get everything within the time limit, then it will go away. Alright, so that's pretty much all there is to the reward points. It's not too, difficult. Now let's just jump into the shop and kind of show you what you should be getting early on. So as I said, you want to pick up a couple of factions that are interesting to you, and then you can go to the card keg section here, and you just want to usually buy faction kegs to start off with. Really build up a faction or two, maybe you really like Northern Realms or Monsters. Go for those, buy some of those kegs and build up your collection for those factions. Now if you do want to spend money on Gwent, I have kind of a list of things that I would recommend here to purchase. So let me just pop out real quick and go have a look at Journey. So Journey is kind of like the battle pass for Gwent, I should say. I don't know how valuable Journey will be in the future. The first Journey that they released has a lot of really good unlocks for you. So I would recommend unlocking this. It's only, I believe, $8 or something like that, at least for me. So consider getting this. You get a lot of kind of extra cards, extra rewards. Particularly if you're going to play a lot of Gwent, then do consider unlocking the Journey as your kind of first way to spend money. But there are some quite good options other than the Journey to spend money on here. So yeah, we'll have a look at all the different packs there are. So the one I recommend first would be the starter pack. This is just decent value, only $4, and you get a pretty good amount of stuff. 10 kegs, a legendary card, and some powder, which isn't too useful, but pretty good amount of kegs for the cost. And then the ultimate starter pack is also pretty decent. You get 35 kegs, $35. Kegs are a bit more expensive than that usually, so this is not a bad deal, all things considered. That will help kind of build your collection up a bit. Next, I would recommend the Northern Realms faction pack if you're interested in Northern Realms, and the Skellige faction pack. The other faction packs are not so good because the cards contained the legendaries that you get are not particularly useful. Letho requires you to have kind of another couple of gold cards to make him work. The Ithlin's not a very good card right now, and likewise with Monsters. Now Syndicate faction pack is pretty decent, so you can consider getting this if you're interested in playing Syndicate. Likewise with the intro deck, both of those, buying those will give you definitely some good core cards to kind of start a Syndicate deck up with, but they are quite expensive, so I'm not sure I'd recommend getting them. Maybe stay away from that and just go for these very cheap options. If you're interested in these two factions, you get some cards and a pretty good legendary for each. But yeah, if things change and the cards included in these kind of faction packs do end up being quite good, then of course buying those will be probably worthwhile, but as things stand, not really. I'd also recommend just staying away from the intro decks. They are quite expensive. Effectively what they're going to give you is a few very decent gold cards, but apart from that, not too much. Thronebreaker is also another thing that you can consider buying. Of course, it gives you kind of a whole extra game. I already have it, so I can't kind of show you what you get here, but you get quite a few cards from that, and you get to play Thronebreaker, which is a game in itself. So if that's something that interests you, consider buying that. But other than that, yeah, stay away from the intro packs for the most part. They might improve in the future, but for now they're not very worthwhile. And yeah, I'd recommend getting faction-specific kegs to fill out factions. Look at the videos and streams on YouTube once you start building up that collection, start getting closer to the higher ranks, and then you can work out if you're missing any cards from any particular card sets. If you are, you can then choose to kind of purchase maybe some Merchants of Ophir kegs or whatever gives you the most chance of filling out your collection nicely. So that's how I'd recommend spending your resources. You should be able to build up a pretty decent collection, if you grind out those daily challenges, spend your reward points wisely, maybe drop a few dollars here or there, to get some of those starter bundles and stuff like that. But yeah, Gwent is a pretty free-to-play friendly game, so you should be okay. Definitely will be able to build a deck or two in no time. So, that's pretty much it for my beginner guide. Hopefully it wasn't too confusing, especially with some of the gameplay aspects, but I'm sure if you watch some more of my videos, you'll start to get the hang of those ideas, and really just have a lot of fun with the game. you know, take it easy, build some decks, play some cards, and yeah, have fun, etc. So do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my videos, because they might be helpful to you. Otherwise, have fun and good luck out there, as I've said, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.